after he warned at a rally over the weekend that there would be a bloodbath if he's not elected. Quoting now from his social media post today, the fake news the fake news made a big deal out of the word bloodbath, knowing that it was about our shrinking auto manufacturing business and the fact that they use the same name all the time. Now, before we go any further, here's what he actually said in context Saturday in Ohio.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
So as you hear, he certainly did start off by talking about car makers and apparently a bloodbath if he's not elected for the whole car industry. But he stopped himself and then elaborated, saying, quote, that would be the least of it, meaning the car industry. He then said it's going to be a bloodbath for the country. Now, keeping him honest, the former president now backtracking and claiming he was just talking about cars. But in the same speech, he said that if he does not win in November, it might be the last election this country has. And this is what Trump does. We know this. He uses apocalyptic language and incendiary rhetoric, then claims he's being misinterpreted. It's not anything new for the former president. Just ask a fellow Republican who said this about Trump's speech.
The general tone of the speech is why many Americans continue to wonder, should President Trump be president? That kind of rhetoric, it's always on the edge. Maybe doesn't cross, maybe does, depending upon your perspective.
That's Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy conceding a point about Trump's events that many, if not most, in his party gloss over. Now, Trump said plenty of other stuff as well. Here's how the rally began.
Please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
Those hostages he's referring to, of course, are the jailed January 6 rioters, four of whom the Washington Post identified as having been charged with assaulting police officers. That's who the former president saluted over the weekend, people who stormed the Capitol after another inflammatory speech of his, whom he praised with his very first words on Saturday.
Well, thank you very much. And you see the spirit from the hostages, and that's what they are, as hostages. They've been treated terribly and very unfairly, and you know that, and everybody knows that. And we're going to be working on that soon. The first day we get into office, we're going to save our country, and we're going to work with the people to treat those unbelievable patriots, and they were unbelievable patriots and are.
Hostages and patriots. This is what he said about migrants.
Young people, they're in jail for years, if you call them people. I don't know if you call them people. In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion, but I'm not allowed to say that because the radical left says it's a terrible thing to say.
And before he was done, Trump added in another thinly veiled threat.
We better straighten out our elections. We better get smart because the people of the country are not going to take it. We're not going to take it. We're not going to take it any longer.
Perspective now from conservative attorney George Conway and former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, who we should mention is running in Maryland's 3rd congressional district as a Democrat. George, I feel like we've had this conversation, though not on this particular word before, but hearing him talk about a bloodbath for the country, what came to mind?
It's classic Donald Trump. The context here isn't that he was talking about the auto industry. He was talking about the auto industry, but he uses this apocalyptic language, this violent language consistently, almost on any topic. And the reason fundamentally is the true context. And the true context is his state of mind, his mental abilities, and his personality disorders. He is a narcissistic psychopath. I mean, if you look at the definitions in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, he is clearly a sociopath and a psychopath. And that connotes an individual who has no conscience, no limits, is a pathological liar, as we see about his discussion of the January 6th and the so-called stolen election. I mean, he cannot help himself. He does this stuff because he doesn't care about the consequences and because he catastrophizes everything in order to cause his cultish supporters to support him and to do his bidding. And it's just, I think we've been dancing around the main problem here. It's not his rhetoric. I mean, his rhetoric does cause problems, but the cause of his rhetoric is his fundamental mental instability.
Officer Dunn, I mean, you were a firsthand witness to the attack on the Capitol. You know what happened that day. When you hear the former president of the United States calling these attackers hostages, what do you think?
Anderson, good to be with you, George. Good to see you, my friend. I'm not surprised. It's more of the same things that we've heard from him before. The rhetoric that he uh, continued to spew leading up to January 6th. Fight like hell. You won't have a country left. He said those things, and the individuals that attacked the Capitol, my fellow officers and myself, and those individuals parroted those same phrases while they were attacking us, while they're marching through the halls of the Capitol. So they don't fall those words. They don't fall upon deaf ears. Donald Trump knows what he's doing when he says that, and he knows that his words have power, and he knows that individuals you know, will follow what he says. Now, it's clear he may have been talking about the auto industry, but who uses the term bloodbath to talk about the auto industry? Bloodbath is a violent term, and I've only heard it used in one way. So he knew what he was doing, and he's hoping that somehow, secretly, his followers are listening to what he's saying. He's saying the quiet part out loud. He's hoping that they're reading between the lines, say, if you know what I mean.
George, the former president also said if he loses the election, quote, I don't think you're going to have another election, or certainly not an election that's meaningful. It seems like most people just shrug this stuff off at this point as, oh, that's just Trump being Trump.
You can't shrug it off. I mean, that is classic. I mean, what psychologists would call that's classic projection. He is stating what he intends, and he's not well. He is just not well, and that's the reason why he says all these things. No normal person would say these things, and the problem we have is that people want to fit Donald Trump into a normal mode. It brings to mind, I think one of the failures of the media is that they've tried to explain him in the way that you would explain a normal, healthy, or somewhat eccentric human being. But he is completely off his rocker. It reminds me, for example, of when the former head of this network, Chris Licht, met with Donald Trump before that CNN town hall and said, go out there and have fun. That's not something you say to a sociopath. That's not something you say to a psychopath. The problem we have with Donald Trump, and I think I think the floodgates on this are going to open, is that people have tried to normalize him for too long. He is definitively, manifestly unwell. He is a sick person. As the President Biden says, he's a sick puppy.
And also, Don, I mean, this is going to be a long campaign, and if this is the rhetoric at this stage of the campaign, I mean, do you talk to your colleagues, Officer Dunn, about this type of language? Is there worry from you or others that something like January 6th would happen again?
Sure, but to go back to the point about Donald Trump saying that if he doesn't win, there's going to be no other elections or anything like that, I'd argue the opposite. I believe that if he does win, there would be no other elections. I mean, he said it himself that he wants to be a dictator. At what point do we stop, talking about his rhetoric and on the surface level and actually take it for what it is? He's proven to be a man of his word when it comes to threats like that. So I think we have to. The courts aren't doing it. Congress isn't doing it. Although that we would argue that's why I'm running for Congress, to do something more than what's being done right now. But it's up to the voters that are up to. It's up to us. We are the people that's going to hold Donald Trump accountable and responsible. And to talk about can January 6th happen again, the point of accountability is to deter things like that from happening again. Up until this point, yeah, there's people still that have been held accountable for their crimes, the foot soldiers, if you will. But overall, we're still litigating if the president can be held accountable for this 3 years later. So something is, the justice system is broken. People are being held accountable, everybody except for him. And we need to do it as Americans. It's up to us to save it, because it's clear that the Supreme Court isn't going to do it. We're seeing that all these hiccups that Jack Smith's investigations are coming across. But it's up to the American people, and we need to do it at the ballot box, just like we did before. We rejected them before, and we have to do it again.
Harry Dunn, appreciate your time. George Conway as well. Thank you. Coming up next.